Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about the difference between character needs and character wants, and why both matter. So let's get started. One of the most common problems in early drafts isn't weak dialogue or world building or even plot. It's characters who aren't driving the story. Very often, this happens because the writer hasn't clearly defined two very important things, namely what the character wants and what the character actually needs. These two forces are the engine of character development. They create conflict, they shape the story's emotional arc, and they're often the difference between a story that feels flat and one that feels deeply satisfying. In this video, we're going to break down the difference between a character's want and their need, why stories become stronger when those two things are in conflict, and how you can use this idea to strengthen your own novel. So, what is a character's want? This is the goal they are actively pursuing in the story. It's external, it's visible, and it's usually something concrete. For instance, a character might want to win a competition, to save their kingdom, to prove themselves to someone, to solve a mystery, to get revenge, or to fall in love. This want is what drives the plot forward, because if your character wants something badly enough, they'll make decisions, take risks, and push the story into motion. For example, in many mystery novels, the protagonist wants to uncover the truth about a crime. In adventure stories, the protagonist might want to retrieve an artifact or stop a villain. In romance stories, the characters often want to pursue or protect a relationship. These wants create action, but on their own, they're not enough to create a satisfying character arc. That's where the need comes in. So, what is a character's need? This is the internal lesson they must learn in order to grow. Unlike wants, needs are usually emotional or psychological. They often involve overcoming a false belief, fear, or flaw. For instance, a character might need to learn to trust others. They might need to learn to accept themselves, let go of control, forgive someone, stop seeking validation, or take responsibility for their actions. The need represents the internal change the character must undergo, and this change is what creates the emotional payoff at the end of the story. Readers don't just want to see a character accomplish something, they want to see the character become someone new. The key idea to keep in mind is wants and needs often conflict. In many powerful stories, the characters' want and need pull them in different directions. This tension creates depth. It forces the character to make difficult decisions, and it builds the emotional arc of the story. For example, imagine a character whose want is to prove that they're strong and independent. Maybe they refuse help from anyone. They insist on solving everything on their own. But their need might be to learn that relying on others isn't weakness. Throughout the story, their pursuit of independence creates problems. They push people away, they make mistakes they could have avoided, and eventually they reach a point where they must decide. Do they keep chasing their want, or do they confront the truth about what they actually need? That moment of choice is often where the character arc reaches its peak. To clarify, we'll look at three different scenarios. First, let's imagine a protagonist who desperately wants career success. Maybe they're trying to win a prestigious award or land an important promotion. Their want is recognition. They believe that if they achieve this goal, they'll finally feel worthy. but their need might be to realize that their self-worth can't come from external validation. Throughout the story, they might sacrifice relationships, ignore their well-being, or compromise their values. At first, these choices seem justified because they're chasing their goal, but as the story progresses, the cost becomes clear, and eventually they face a turning point. They can either continue pursuing success at any cost, or they can recognize that what they truly need is a healthier relationship with themselves. When the character confronts that truth, their arc feels meaningful. Another common character dynamic involves isolation. Imagine a hero who wants to protect everyone around them. They believe that keeping emotional distance makes them stronger, so they push people away. They refuse help. They carry every burden alone. Their want is to remain self-reliant, but their need is to learn, trust, and connection. Over the course of the story, their isolation begins to backfire. They can't solve every problem alone. Their refusal to rely on others leads to mistakes. Eventually, the only way forward is to accept help. And when they finally allow others in, that moment represents growth. The character hasn't just solved the external problem, they've changed internally. Revenge is another great example of wants and needs clashing. A character might want revenge against someone who wronged them. That goal drives the entire story. They train, they track their enemy, they sacrifice everything to reach their target. But their need might be to let go of anger and move forward. If they achieve revenge but remain consumed by hatred, the story can feel hollow. But if the story leads them to confront the cost of revenge, something deeper happens. They may realize that vengeance won't heal the wound they carry, and that realization becomes the emotional resolution. So why does this matter for your story? Well, because if your character only has a want, your story may feel plot-driven, but emotionally shallow, meaning events happen, goals are pursued, but readers may not feel deeply invested in the character's growth. On the other hand, if you understand both the want and the need, you gain something powerful. You gain a roadmap for the character arc. The want drives the plot. The need drives the transformation. And when those two forces collide, the story gains tension and emotional weight. If you're struggling to define these for your character, try asking two questions. First, what does my character believe will solve their problems? That belief often points to the want. Then ask, what actually needs to change inside them? That answer often reveals the need. For example, a character might believe they need power to feel safe, but what they actually need is trust. Or they might believe they need revenge to find closure, but what they truly need is healing. Once you identify that contrast, the character arc begins to take shape. You can also use this idea to improve your story's structure. As the story progresses, events should gradually challenge the character's want. The things they believe will solve their problems start to fail. Their approach creates consequences, and slowly the truth about their deeper need becomes harder to ignore. By the time the story reaches its climax, the character faces a choice. Do they keep pursuing their want, or do they embrace the need and change? That choice often defines the ending. What matters here is that when readers connect with a character, it's rarely because the character is perfect. It's because the character is struggling with something real. They want something desperately, but what they truly need lies somewhere deeper. And watching them confront that truth is what makes a story resonate. So if you're working on a novel and your characters feel a little bit flat, try looking at these two questions. What does your character want? And what do they actually need? The gap between those two things might be where your story comes alive. If you found this helpful, I'd love to know if there's a character from a book or a movie whose arc you really loved. Often the most memorable characters have very clear wants and needs, and watching those collide is what makes their story powerful. And if you're currently working on a novel, feel free to share your protagonist's want and need in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your story. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.